You guys ready to have a CNF good time? This is the hashtag CNF podcast. I'm your host, Brendan O'Mara. This is where we talk to artists, writers, and filmmakers, you name it, about creating works of narrative nonfiction. And today, we have Kim Kankiewicz, who won Creative Nonfiction's essay contest for issue 62, themed Joy. It won the Best Essay Prize, and it's damn good. It's called Rumors of Lost Stars. And we'll get to that most certainly very, very soon. A couple of housekeeping things. As you all know, I like to try to get the subscription stuff out of the way, so please subscribe on iTunes and Google Play Music if you're an Androider. I'm an Androider, so it's nice to see the old hashtag up on the Google Play Music store. So Kim Kankiewicz, where to start? She is a Seattle area writer and editor. She writes essays, articles, and reviews for publications that include Brain, Child, Salon, Pacific Standard, Colorado Review, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and Full Grown People. Her work has also been anthologized in Full Grown People's Greatest Hits. So we're dealing with a heavy hitter here. So without further ado, this is Kim Kankiewicz, and I started by asking her what that moment was like when she won Creative Nonfiction's essay prize.
In fact, I was Skyping some people at the University of Nebraska at Kearney for an article that I was researching, and I clicked on my email because I was about 5 minutes early, read the announcement, burst into tears. We were video conferencing, so then I was a complete mess, and thought that I may have imagined the email. So throughout this conversation about a completely different topic with these people I was interviewing, I kept checking my email and confirming that it said what I had indeed read. And so it was surreal and very encouraging because, as you know, you write in isolation, and a rejection doesn't give you a lot of feedback. So, I had submitted a different version of that essay to a couple of other places, and who knows if it was even worth revising at just based on a rejection, even an encouraging one. You don't know, within the individual piece, what's working, what's not, and so it was a surprise. It was a validation that, I can keep working on something, and it maybe is on the right track, and just that I had connected with somebody. I guess that's the other thing about writing personal essays. I don't know if anybody else cares. And, what I have to process in my own thinking and experience, does that matter to anybody else? Will that have meaning to anybody else? Not in an egocentric way, but, the reason I write is to make connections with other people. And so if it did that in some way, that's really encouraging.
When you were drafting the essay and going through your various levels of creation with it, like how mindful were you and are you of trying to connect to the reader on the other side of it that you may never meet? Or is that something you save for later in the process once you start like chipping at the marble?
Yeah, so I start with that, and then I revise with that. But while I'm writing, I get a little lost in the language. That might be sort of something that slows me down in my process. But while I'm writing, I'm really focused on language and structure, and not so much on audience. So I hope that I have an idea of that when I start working on the piece, and then when I have a draft, I start looking at that again.
Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you're crafting an essay or something similar?
Yeah, I think someone who has some of my experience in common is probably what I'm picturing. It depends on the piece. Sometimes it's someone more like a parent figure, I guess. Sometimes someone younger than me. Sometimes, so it really depends on the thing that I'm writing. But often, like with this one, it was somebody who could find commonality with my particular experience.
And how did you arrive at this essay, Rumors of Lost Stars, and how did you devise its structure around this around these three stars, like Vega, Altair, and Deneb?
Yeah.
And maybe you can give a little oversight of what kind of just in a little graph about what the essay's about in your words, and then dive into how you decided to hang the structure around those stars.
Sure. Okay. So the essay is set during a summer while I was still an undergraduate and was losing vision in my right eye. And at that point, I had pretty low vision in my left eye as well. So I was teaching assistant at an astronomy camp that involved pretty much any night it was clear enough to see the stars, we would go stargazing. And it was an experience that felt, I felt very separate from the students that I was taking on these stargazing trips because I couldn't see what they could see. And I had recently recovered or was in recovery from an eating disorder. So some of those feelings of being separate from and just, it's at the age where you're kind of figuring out your identity and all of those things were converging. And so that was, I guess, probably one of the more profound experiences I'd had at the point when I originally started writing the essay, which was just a few years after that. And then that I finished it, submitted it a couple of places, just didn't really have a sense of what it was about, even for myself. And so it just sat for a long time without me going back to it until Creative Nonfiction had announced the joy theme. And I think that going back to this essay had been at the back of my mind for about a year before that. And I don't honestly know why, what brought it back, except that I'm very motivated by closure. So anything that I've started at some point, I want to come back around to it and complete it. Mm-hmm. So the theme, just something clicked with it that this is about joy. It's about an experience because during that summer, there was one night that we went to a rural area and I didn't expect that this would be any different than any other night we went stargazing, but I was able to see the stars and it was a very joyful moment. And so I then, with the theme of joy, was able to look again at the meaning of that night within the context of that summer and what does that have to say about the experience of joy. And so then when I started writing, I kind of gravitate toward threes anyway in structuring even an individual sentence. And so it kind of jumped out right away just with what, this draft that I had lying around that I went back to read that there were kind of three parts already. And so the stars in the summer triangle, which we definitely observed while we were doing our stargazing because it was during the summer, so that's just jumped out as a way to structure the essay. And then when that was there, it made it a lot easier.
That must have been a very exciting moment for you just as an artist to see that congruency. Like you already had sort of that wireframe of your essay set up, but then to see such a cosmic alignment to literally in a sense that these three stars and the stories behind them actually just paired up so wonderfully with your own personal experience. You must have just started levitating when you saw that congruency.
Yeah, pretty much. I wrote solid for like a Friday that I had the day off through really late, it was probably Monday, like really late on Sunday night. Once I stumbled on that, because it was so exciting, I just sat down and did the whole thing in a weekend. And
that's what's really kind of interesting and about how this essay came to be published in this issue of Creative Nonfiction was you essentially had this nice locomotive but no tracks to guide it. And then when you got the focus, when someone put what it really was about in front of you, it like honed the focus of the thing, and it was able to get in motion in that sense.
Yeah.
It's sometimes people write through it and then you start to figure out what it's about, but it's almost like you wrote it and then weren't quite sure what it was about until an outside force kind of made you shoehorn it into something, and it really allowed the thing to take flight.
Yeah, very much. That's and so I hope that happens again. I have a lot of pieces that I don't quite know what they're about.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of theme things, and I imagine that it's, even if it's a bit of a stretch, I mean, maybe this essay could vary if they did like who knows, like the opposite of joy, some sort of grief thing or a loss thing. I'm sure you could have found a way to maneuver and manipulate it to fit that theme. So I guess things can be a bit amoebic, and that, right, and they can and can float and find a way and find a focus if you just kind of write to a certain prompt or a certain theme, and you can kind of make it what you want to make it. So when you were writing it, what was you said like when you got the theme of it, and you kind of wrote it in a bit of a sprint. But what is your daily ritual like when you're sort of in that synthesis mode of creating something of this nature?
Right. So I do like to have a longer period to write. Getting up in the morning and writing for an hour or something like that doesn't typically work for me, because I take a long time to think mm-hmm. And figure out where I am in the piece. And so what works best for me is either at night. I'm a parent, so after everyone is sleeping, I can stay up pretty late and get lost in a piece. So, having quiet hours to do that. Or I do generally write some every weekend, not, quite the extent of that essay in this one in particular, but I do usually write for a number of hours straight on a weekend. And it's kind of writing to find the thread, and then writing around it, and playing with language. I'm very motivated by language, attentive to language, and finding phrases and where they fit. And, so I think it's kind of I actually just heard a painter speak about her process and how she gets kind of lost in the painting and what, brush strokes and colors go where. And it sounded a lot like writing to me, that you have this big piece and then all of the elements of it, kind of are, you need time and space to figure out where they go and how they fit together.
Yeah, it's great that you bring up painter. A lot of times I like asking people, whether they be writers or filmmakers or whatever, like, what other artistic media do you consume to help inform your vocation? And because you can find a lot of those, you can find that inspiration in maybe music or painting that helps you become a stronger writer. And is that something you like to revisit elsewhere? Like, what other things might you use to unplug from writing, but also help inform what you like to do?
Yeah, choral music for sure. Mm-hmm. And some of what I'm working on now is about choral music. But I think the sound, because like I was saying about language, I write with my ear, and there's a connection between the appeal of that to me and the appeal of choral music. But, as a participant, and then being surrounded by the sound and the rhythm of what I write is satisfying to. I like the rhythm of writing, and I find that in music too. So I can't write to music that is too upbeat or has lyrics that are too interesting, because I can't really tune that out. I pay attention to that, but I do like writing to say something like medieval or Renaissance music in Latin if I can't really understand what they're saying. And just the soothing sound of that and the different tones of that are not distracting to me and seem like they sort of support what I'm trying to do.
And what other writers or essayists helped inform your style? And, who were some of those influences that helped you like come to the place where you're writing the type of work that Rumors of Lost Stars has become? Like, who were some of those influences?
Yeah. So Brian Doyle, and it's awesome that he's in this issue of Creative Nonfiction.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, right. And specifically him because a lot of great writing is about really, really difficult stuff, especially personal writing. And I appreciate that writing. But for whatever reason, I am attempting a lot of times to write about something that in the end has kind of a redemptive quality, or there's some sort of moment of elevation that sort of makes the difficult stuff beautiful in some way. And I think he does that really well. One of the first things I remember reading of his was a brief essay, a brief excerpt from his book about, now I'm going to just space on the title of it, but about his son's heart condition. And there was an essay published in one of the Best American Essay series about the hummingbird heart and then elephant hearts. And it like kind of, in this very brief essay, contained a whole bunch of meaning. It was beautiful, but it was about a really difficult thing, his son's heart condition. And then since reading, some of his work, I find that quality of finding beauty in the things that are traumatic or difficult parts of the human experience. So he does that. I really enjoy the lyrical quality of Sonia Livingston. I didn't know much about her until fairly recently. I love her work because she pulls together many themes and sort of knowledge about different people and historical moments. And I love that too. When I start writing something, everything I write is sort of about everything in the world when I start writing it, and then like rein it in somehow. But I love it when people manage to do that, in some way, that this piece is going to be about this one experience, but I'm also going to talk about, the history of the women's movement at the same time, or this historical figure, and somehow weave that in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, getting to your point about how Brian Doyle was able to take some heavy topic, but produce some sort of that uplifting quality towards the end. Like in the third section of your essay, there were a couple sentences I had underlined, specifically. As you're, losing your eyesight in your right eye, is like, my ability to see the stars doesn't mean they are gone. And then towards the very end, you say, like, what if joy is the momentary glimpse of a beauty we sense but can't always perceive? Uh-huh. And it's like this thing, like you're making lemonade out of lemons in this sense. And that's like going right to what you were saying about trying to end these things that are a bit heavy in subject matter and giving them levity and saying, like, well, I may be down, but I'm not out, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It's really hard to do that now. In the last several months, you've probably experienced that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's made writing really challenging if that's kind of part of my personal mission, what propels me as a writer. Just the climate right now is not conducive to that.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of serendipitous. That an issue-themed joy of unexpected brightness in the darkest times seemed to come out right after January 20th. So it was kind of like, it was like, all right, well, this gives us some degree of hope that there are these wonderful stories that can lift us up and provide some of that inspiration that we need and let us know that it's out there and that it's not, there is something beyond the immediate despair.
Yeah.
So what are some books that you tend to reread the most? If you are in fact one of the people who are rereaders of books.
Yeah, I have to confess that I'm not because I like to read everything and I always feel like there's more that I want to read and haven't read and I'm going to run out of time. So I don't typically reread book length work. I do reread essays, and many of them are in anthologies. So Best American, I have those and reread work from those. And I try to always be subscribing to a handful of literary journals and, kind of vary which ones I'm subscribing to and then keep them on hand so I can reread the ones that stand out to me, I guess. And yeah.
What are some of the lit journals you subscribe to?
Currently, I have Creative Nonfiction, the Georgia Review, the Normal School, Ruminate. I like that one. That has like I was talking about the redemptive quality. That one is overtly connected to faith. So there's a lot of times a strain of that in their work. I'm peeking back at my where I am right now. Under the Gum Tree, and I have that. And I think that's all I'm subscribing to currently. I have the Missouri Review. I like that journal, and I have subscribed to that in the past. Yeah.
And what are some essays that you reread a lot?
I reread a lot of Rebecca Solnit's, and I'm not necessarily really writing like her, but they're just so idea rich, and you kind of have to reread to get what you didn't get the first time.
And what was the moment you knew that you wanted to be a writer?
As soon as I could read. Yeah, that's all I really ever wanted to be, and so I became everything else. And then, but yeah, as a kid, I remember the first book I read was a Nancy Drew book, and high literary quality that it is. I just knew that I wanted to do that, create that experience for other people because reading was my favorite thing to do as a kid. And I wanted to be part of the group of people who made that happen.
Did you, as a little kid, write your own Nancy Drew mysteries?
Oh, yeah. My friend and I enacted some too. And but I very imitative kinds of writing. My dad had a typewriter at home, and so I probably used it more than he did writing. We'd see a movie or something, and I'd come home and write, I guess, what amounts to fan fiction with the characters and imitate the styles of the books that I enjoyed. So yeah, definitely.
So what would you say to this point is your proudest moment as a writer?
The Creative Nonfiction, just publication in there, and the prize would be up there. But actually, one of my favorite moments and proudest moments is writing and delivering a eulogy for my grandfather's funeral.
Huh. And when was that?
That was in 1997, and my brother wrote a song that we performed. And then, I wrote it was at that time, to me, felt like the most cohesive thing I had written and read in public. So
what did your grandfather mean to you?
He was a carpenter. He was a handyman kind of guy, and he was very honest and hardworking, and he lived about 6 hours from where I grew up, and he and my grandmother would come to almost anything that my brother and I had, like we were in plays, or when we graduated, we had certain events going on. They would come to those, and then my grandpa would come in the summer and kind of help us renovate our house basically every summer. He'd kind of focus on a project. And so just the sort of being involved with extended family, being supportive, always coming to show support and interest in what we were doing, and his ability to do those home renovation projects was like magic to me. I'm so not mechanical. And so what he could do, it's like, how can anybody do that? And I would just watch him and be fascinated and highly impressed by what he could do.
And the way he approached his work, did that help inform you in the work that you do now?
Probably the sticking with it part, for sure. But I have kind of thought about this, the kind of worker or the approach that he took, or somebody who is kind of working with something hands-on. I mean, it is an art in a way, but there's a tangible quality and a goal that you know when it's fixed. And sometimes I wish that's the kind of work that I did, because writing is so not like that, especially with this, kind of personal essay or creative nonfiction writing.
It's so subjective much of the time that you can never know if it needs fixing or if it just didn't land in the right lap. But with craftsmanship of some nature, you build there are some nuance to, say, building a table, but by and large, if it stands upright and doesn't wobble, well, there you go.
Right.
What was the and it could have been the eulogy you presented at your grandfather's funeral, but what was the biggest validation you received in your early years that gave you confidence that you could write and tell stories as a vocation?
Yeah. So actually, as a senior in high school, the English teacher, I went to a very small school, so we all had the same senior English teacher, and she was wonderful, but she nominated my writing for a state award, and that kind of made me think for the first time I could do this for somebody besides myself.
Yeah.
So that moment stands out to me, that it kind of clicked that even though I had wanted to be a writer all my life, I kind of thought real people don't do that.
Right.
So that was the moment when I thought, oh yeah, maybe I could.
Well, yeah, that maybe that was the moment where you and then like subsequently your English teacher like gave yourself permission to pursue it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And that seems to be kind of a recursive process of, okay, I'm giving myself permission. Like right now, I'm giving myself permission to write fiction, which I have, told myself I'm not good at doing that for off and on for years. So, but yeah, I have to give myself permission to say, well, it may not go anywhere, but I'm going to write it anyway.
And what was that piece of writing that your English teacher nominated? Do you remember?
I do. That was a poem inspired by a T.S. Eliot poem. And I don't actually write poetry at this point, but it was a narrative poem. So it had, the elements of story that I'm drawn to. And then the language, like I said, that was, I think, the part that got it nominated, the use of language.
And what did being a successful writer look like when you were in college versus where you are now with several published credits and being a working writer?
Yeah. So I kind of always thought, well, I'll know that I'm a writer when I write a book, and I haven't done that still. So in college, that would have been kind of the definition for me. And since then, it's setting publication in different venues as a goal, having a piece that means a lot to me published eventually, that I set more project specific goals or publication specific goals in terms of, the venue for publication. And just if I can do it and continue to make some kind of a living, with the kind of writing that pays too is a little different, but but just to be able to continue to do that is success. And it's not so much as being like I thought as a college student, somebody who's written a book and is known for having written a book. That isn't so important to me anymore. And I do want to write a book still, but I don't think that defines me as a writer at this point.
And how do you process, say, the new year and the goals for keeping the writing vocation afloat and ensuring that you're sort of creatively fulfilled, but you're also doing the kind of nuts and bolts things that allow you to keep doing it for the long term? Yeah.
I do kind of a visual mapping thing at the beginning of every year with sort of do a grid on a big piece of paper and throw the projects that are at the back of my mind or in some draft form, each of those into a square, and then make little notes on, what's kind of the most compelling to me right now, what could be another step in that process. And so then when I do on the weekend work on something, it's the one that's I've identified as, closest to done, or I see an opportunity to refine it and submit it to a certain place, or, so the beginning of the year, I kind of put it in visual form. And then the writing that pays the bills is kind of, that's fallen into a little more of a schedule. It's the 9 to 5, kind of working time. So that's always going on. And I try to fit the other writing into the evenings and weekends and use that visual mapping as a way to organize my thinking about it.
I think there's a quote from Tony Robbins who once said, he's like, we tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10. And I wonder, like, how do you see yourself long term? Like in the span of 10 years, what would you like to see your name on?
I think a collection of essays, and a novel. I would like to write a novel. So 10 years, that seems I probably could do that in 10 years.
Very nice. And where can people find you online, Kim?
I'm at kimkankiewicz.com.
Okay. And are you on any of the other socials, or is it just your website?
No, I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty silent on Twitter, but I do have an account. It's at Kim Probable. Mm-hmm. And I just have a personal Facebook page at this point. But
sure.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, Kim, congratulations on winning the essay prize. It's a great story. I've read it twice already. I'll probably read it again very soon. And
Thank you.
And thanks so much for carving out some time in your morning and to come on the show.
Sure. Thanks for asking me, Brendan. It was fun talking with you.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.